Good morning. Welcome to today's Northland Diversity and Aging Series event. Please introduce yourself in the chat feature, and we will start in a couple of seconds. Okay, wonderful. So because this event is held through Zoom webinar, attendees' audio and video are disabled, but we really do want to encourage your participation in today's event. So please use the chat feature throughout the event to respond to speakers or panelists or make a comment. But we do ask that you use the Q&A feature for questions for panelists and speakers. Please don't use chat for questions. And if we run out of time before all of the questions are answered, we will answer them in a post-event follow-up email. Okay, let's get started. Welcome again, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mimi Stender with Duluth Aging Support, one of the organizations that came together over a year ago to create the Northland Diversity and Aging Series. The Northland Diversity and Aging Series is a collaboration of the College of St. Scholastica's Office of Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, and the Gerontology Program, the Northland Foundation, the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging, and of course, Duluth Aging Support. I'd like to thank our series partners for their wisdom and commitment to making each event in this series happen. And I'd like to extend a special call out of gratitude to the moderators for each event in these series, Dr. Amy Bergstrom and Georgia Lane. And also special gratitude to my fantastic Duluth Aging Support coordinating partner, Rebecca Alsam, and our tech expert, Eric Mystery, as well as today's ASL interpreters, Janae Farnham and Tricia Harvey. Okay, so did you know that November is National Family Caregiver Month? We would love to get a sense of who knew that before today's event. Please put in the chat a yes or a no, because if we get a lot of no's, then we know that next year we have a lot more to do to promote this special month. So for today's Northland Diversity and Aging Series event, we are focusing on supporting caregivers in the workforce, an important and timely topic. Caregiving has a tremendous impact on employees' physical and mental health, productivity, absenteeism, financial situation, and ability to remain in the workforce. And employers that aren't adequately supporting their caregiver employees undoubtedly are paying the price through hidden costs associated with productivity loss and employee turnover. We are very grateful to our fantastic speakers and panelists today who are going to shed some light on this topic. Today, you'll hear from Kathy McClear, State Director of AARP Minnesota, Dr. Heidi Orsted, Clinical Consultant with Marsh McLennan Agency, Pam Lonnie, a working caregiver, Bill Tiedemann, Tiedemann Consulting Group, and Jessica Miller, Director of Workforce Strategy for the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. And for all events in our series, we have two fantastic moderators, both of which serve on our Northland Diversity and Aging Series team. Georgia Lane is a Senior Program Developer for the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging, and Dr. Amy Bergstrom serves as the Chief Diversity Officer of the College of St. Scholastica. Amy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Mimi, and it's a real privilege and a pleasure to be with all of you today. Again, welcome, and just want to do a brief introduction here in my traditional language of Anishinaabe-Moan, and so Buju, Anishinaabe Dug, Ogama Wasigik, Indigenous Ka, Jagina Shimang, Mishwa, Gamiwi, Zaga, Iganing, Nindun Jaba, Migazi, and Dundame, Beja Gabanuji, Adam Indigenous Kas, the College of St. Scholastica and Don Oki, Bungi et Go Ninata Ojiboimon, Miigwich Bizanda Wayeg, So thank you. And it's a pleasure for me to be able to use it's a pleasure for me to be able to use my my native language, Anishinaabe, and to be able to greet you and my Anishinaabe relatives today in our home language. I'm also privileged to be able to share with you the land acknowledgement that the Diversity and Aging Series team recognizes that we currently live and work on originally was and continues to be the homelands of Indigenous people. We currently enjoy access to this land because the land was ceded in a nation-to-nation treaty process between the Anishinaabe and the United States government. By recognizing Indigenous homelands, we accept our shared history and make a commitment to shape our ongoing relationships with justice and reconciliation as our guiding values. So with that, I want to welcome all of you and turn it over to my co-moderator, Georgia. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amy, and welcome everyone. It's great to see everyone here today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to pop on. As Mimi said, I am the senior program developer with the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging. And very excited about this topic today. I don't think it could be more timely. We are coming into the holidays, which means busy times for everyone, and really pausing to think about caregivers. I myself am a working caregiver, and feel it every day, as I'm sure many of you do. So this is both a personal topic as well as a professional topic, and we just have a wonderful group of folks here today. So I am really pleased to be able to introduce Kathy McLear. Kathy has been with AARP since 2005, serving first as the Associate State Director for Communications in the South Dakota State Office, then as Senior Advisor providing strategic support for 9 states. Now as the AARP Minnesota State Director, Kathy serves older Minnesotans through advocacy, community engagement, and volunteer engagement. So welcome, Kathy, and thank you for being here.
Hi, well, thanks everyone for having me. And this is a really important topic that AARP has worked on for a long time. And so I'm really happy to share some statistics and research and some information about how employers can support caregivers in the workplace. So give me just a second. I'm going to share my screen and present. All right, please tell me you're seeing just my slides full screen. No, what are you seeing? Are you seeing my notes?
We're seeing your notes, Kathy.
Okay, let me try again. This worked before. I'm not quite sure why it's not doing it. So let's try again. Share screen 2. And how about now?
That's good.
Oh,
okay,
wonderful.
Great, fantastic. So again, we're talking today about how we can support caregivers in the workplace. And I think that this is a really telling, and I don't know if you can see my little, there we go, move that. This is a really telling quote by Rosalind Carter, that there are really only 4 kinds of people in the world. These are people who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need a caregiver. So that pretty much encompasses everyone. And I'm sorry, I still need to get some of these things out of my way so I can see. All right, now I think I'm in good shape. But that is really telling, because I think we're all going to find ourselves in a caregiving situation, whether we need care or are providing care. I myself have done some caregiving for my dad. My mom is his primary caregiver, but I do have to step in from time to time to help with that. All right, now I got to figure out how to advance my slides. All right, here we go. I think I'm cooking with gas now. So this slide really just shows the trends. And while this information is from 2020, I think you can see that upward trend that nearly 1 in 5 are providing unpaid care to an adult with health or functional needs. And that's something that's been really increasing over the last, 5 years and beyond. When you look at Minnesota, in Minnesota, about 640,000 caregivers are providing 540 million care hours. So that equals, and that's unpaid care. And so that totals to be about $7.8 billion in uncompensated care. And hot off the presses, just this fall, we surveyed Minnesotans 45 and older. And again, 1 in 5 respondents said that they were currently providing unpaid care to an adult relative or a friend. But 43% of respondents indicated that they had provided care in the past. And that same survey, respondents told that 1/3 of respondents said that they would be likely or extremely likely to face serious financial hardship if they had to take unpaid leave from work. And another 21% indicated they would be somewhat likely to face a financial hardship. So this doesn't just affect us emotionally, it affects us financially as well. So what do caregivers do? 6 in 10 caregivers, I think most of us are probably pretty aware of this, but 6 in 10 caregivers help their care recipient with at least one activity of daily living. So things like bathing, dressing, feeding, toileting. And on average, they help their care recipient with almost four and a half instrumental activities of daily living. So things like transportation, errands, chores, helping with medication. And just as importantly, caregivers serve as an advocate and they communicate with healthcare professionals, healthcare providers, and help monitor symptoms. Again, that has a tremendous financial impact. We know on average, working family caregivers spend about $7,200 on out-of-pocket costs due to their caregiving responsibilities. The average caregiver is 49.4 years old. They provide 23.7 hours of care per week, and they tend to care for their care recipient for about 4.5 years. And we know that caregivers are really diverse. 23% are millennials, 4 in 10 male, 17% Hispanic Latino, 14% African American Black, 5% Asian American Pacific Islander. And kind of another interesting piece about that in terms of who is caregiving, 6%, so 23% are millennials, but 6% of caregivers are Gen Z, 29% of caregivers are Gen X. I just turned 50 in the last year, so I'm part of Gen X. So when you put those 3 categories together, nearly 60% are my age or younger. About 34% are baby boomers, and just 7% of caregivers are the silent generation. And I think that just demonstrates that we are, in fact, an aging society. And it is going to fall more on the responsibility of individuals who are still in the workforce and oftentimes still raising children. We know that caregivers are working. About 73% of United States workers are also caregivers. And so pre-pandemic, about 61% of caregivers experienced one work-related impact due to caregiving responsibilities. And that includes going in late, leaving early, or having to take time off. And 1 in 10 working caregivers had to give up work entirely or retire early. And we know that when this happens, caregivers often face those financial impacts again. They're twice as likely to report high financial strain, and employers appear to be taking note of some of those challenges that are facing caregivers in the workforce. Caregivers often report that having workplace benefits such as paid family leave or paid sick time off, that's a huge help for them. But most caregivers still report having no paid family leave in their workplace. So here's a look at how family caregiving can affect employees. And so when it becomes difficult to balance those caregiving and work demands, it starts to have some conflict in those caregiving responsibilities. So those caregivers are forced to either make changes in their work situation. So again, things like taking a leave of absence or going from working full-time to part-time. And the reasons that they might stop working is that they need more time to care, that their job just wasn't flexible enough, or they couldn't afford to get help to provide that caregiving. And among employee caregivers who are not self-employed, about half reported that their supervisor at work was aware of their caregiving responsibility. And so as we go forward in how employers can support those caregivers, we'll talk a little bit about where awareness comes into play. So 1 out of 6 employees are caregivers. That's nearly 17% of today's workforce. And again, as we know, that is just expected to grow as our population ages. As people live longer and they work longer, experts expect really just a growing number of employees who will have to juggle their jobs with caregiving or caring for aging parents or ill relatives. I think we also recognize that family caregiver may not necessarily mean a blood relative. It might mean, driving your next door neighbor to their doctor appointments or delivering meals for someone, or a domestic partnership situation. So it's really whoever you define as your family that you are in fact caring for. And this takes a look at why caregiving support matters to employers. It really is central to diversity and inclusion. It can be, providing those supports in the workplace can be a recruitment and a retention tool. Failure to support employee caregivers costs U.S. employers about $3,000 per working caregiver. And that's as a result of lower productivity, more absenteeism, higher healthcare costs, and ultimately staff turnover. And when you start to add all that up, it's about $34 billion annually. So from some of our most recent survey headlines, including a percentage of who say they'd look for a new job. So new research shows that 75% of caregivers worry about juggling work and caregiving duties once they do return to the office. Some 8 in 10 caregivers say that the pandemic had increased their overall level of stress, especially with how many with their workplaces reopening. 2/3 of caregivers express juggling their responsibilities in the next 12 months. More than half of caregivers say that they received flexible work schedules during the pandemic and were able to work at home at least part-time. And more than 4 in 10 said that they would consider looking for a new job if their employer would roll back those benefits. So again, some of those really key pieces to the benefits of supporting caregivers in the workplace and having a caregiver-friendly workplace. It really maximizes productivity and improves employees' physical and emotional health. Again, it can attract and retain talent, reduces healthcare costs and indirect workplace costs. So we know that, again, it's a tremendous benefit to be able to, provide that. HR recruitment Skype interviews are replacing in-person meet and greet sessions, utilizing onboarding and social media sites like LinkedIn, which offer enhanced networking to get the right workers with the core values and the skill sets through the door. And so it becomes a real recruitment tool. So if you are an employee who is trying to balance work and caregiving, and I think a little bit earlier I had referenced that only about half of employees who were caregiving had shared that information with their employer, it really is important to share that information with your manager. So being transparent, really discussing your caregiving journey, share some of your concerns, and discuss what policies and practices could help you better balance your caregiving responsibilities with your workload. And together you can brainstorm some flexible work options that benefit you and the team. And understanding that caregivers really do bring unique skill sets. I mean, these are qualities that can help with recruitment and retention, including organizational skills, direct communication, solution-oriented folks who are really looking to solve those problems, These are folks who have to communicate on behalf of the person they're caring for, so they're good communicators. They're good advocates. You know, they are fiercely defending the needs of the person they care for, and they are good at coordination. And so coming up with some practical solutions like backfilling or cross-training, maybe reprioritizing tasks, or providing some of those telework opportunities when it makes sense. So again, we know that those caregiving friendly policies really increase retention. You know, the stat I think I gave earlier was 4 in 10 reported, you know, potentially looking for a new job if they weren't able to have that flexibility in the workforce. And so having a friendly caregiver culture can really boost employee productivity and help businesses grow. Certain policies such as cross-training or flexibility can really help. And when you look at that return on investment for flex time, it's anywhere from just under $2 to just over $4. And the telecommute, I think we all know that, especially in the last couple of days when we had some snow here in Minnesota, that it might have just been easier to stay home and work from home. You could have gotten a lot more done, and that's the same for folks who are providing caregiving. And there are lots of things that employers can do. Some of them are no cost at all. So simply sharing some local caregiving resources, helping your employees know where they can find support for either the caregiving that they are doing or support for the person they're providing care for. Making sure people understand about the HR policies and any information around family medical leave. Be a boss who asks questions. Find out what your employees need in order to feel supported in the workforce. Or if you have a large enough organization to even set up a caregiver support group, knowing that your employees have an opportunity to share their journey with others who are maybe in the same boat as them can be really valuable. So, you know, being able to provide some of that, you know, water cooler time or some lunch hour time to give those folks the support that they need. There's some pretty low cost options as well that employers can offer. They can offer caregiving education. They can provide flexible time policies, opportunities to reduce stress. And to help provide some care planning. And then there are some that are a little bit higher cost, whether it's providing legal and financial planning, whether you offer a health advocacy navigator program, subsidizing home or elder care, or providing caregiver leave. And I'm really fortunate and really pleased to say that AARP walks the walk. We are allowed a certain number of hours every year if we need them to take caregiving leave. And so I was really fortunate to be able to take advantage of a policy like that to help care for my dad this year. Some of it's, you know, creating a culture of awareness. So there's no really one size fits all to creating a caregiver friendly workplace. Companies can really vary in terms of the types of caregiving related supports that they offer, depending on their size, their resources, size of their workforce. But every employer can make a commitment to changing their workplace culture to be more inclusive and responsive to caregiving employees' needs. And some of that just starts with developing a company-wide understanding of some of those challenges that caregivers are facing. Having managers who understand what caregiving entails, understanding what that impact might be on those that they manage, understanding how caregiving represents a risk for depression and chronic illness and loneliness, as well as substance abuse. We know that as we were all very isolated during the pandemic, we know that loneliness and isolation is also correlated with higher incidence of heart disease and stroke, and just not great for your mental mindset. Maternity and paternity and parental leave policies are pretty common, more common among workplaces now, really to varying degrees, but employers are just now starting to make that connection between caring for an aging parent or a sick sibling on that same continuum. And so employers who are really making that commitment and offering benefits and services to support employees can make a really big difference. A holistic approach to well-being is kind of new in concept, and in some cases really includes a comprehensive range of caregiving benefits. When you have staff and benefits managers that oversee these programs, frontline managers. But if an employee caregiver doesn't believe that their manager has the discretion to work with them or feel that they might be penalized, they may not come forward. And so it's really creating that culture of awareness and giving people the space to have that conversation and share what they're going through. So we also know that small employers face really unique challenges. They can't devote the time or the resources that large employers can around some of these issues. And so, trying to come up with some of those strategies and solutions that might help a large employer might not really be feasible for small employers due to their unique situation. And in 2018, AARP had commissioned a quantitative survey of 1,000 businesses to really look at what that impact is that caregiving has on small employers. And we wanted to learn about those experiences of small businesses. And part of the learning was done to provide better resources. So we know that small employers want to do the right thing and help out their employees. Many small employers view their employees as part of their extended family and have deep personal connections to their employees. Small employers know that caregiving is an issue that will only grow in importance over the next 20 years. And many of these employers want to find some way to really provide that support for their employees. So a couple of solutions. You can come up with a formal written caregiving policy, and we know that workplaces that have those policies in place tend to be the most supportive. So increasing communication and transparency can also increase productivity. It strengthens morale, loyalty, and fairness, reduces the cost of turnover, and again, helps attract new talent, and it helps provide better workplace balance. So a few questions to ask about caregiving to an employer. Does your employer believe that caregiving is a priority? Do you have caring data? Is the culture supportive? How do we connect employees to local resources? And those are some really important things that when you're either looking for a job or when you find yourself in that caregiving situation, starting to ask some of those questions. And if your employer doesn't have a written policy, offer to come up with some solutions, offer to help come up with some ideas that will be supportive to yourself, but maybe your employer can live with, or provide some opportunities for that flexibility. And so again, it's really about providing resources to your employers or to your employees. And we do have a number of resources, and I know that Rebecca is going to share both my deck as well as these resources that are all available to you. We have a really tremendous caregiver resource center at AARP. It has a planning guide called Prepare to Care that really, and as we head into the holidays, this is a really great opportunity you can even download that and have a digital version. Take that with you to when you meet with your family and understand what your family's wishes are. It's always harder to make some of those really important decisions when you are in a crisis situation. And so having that conversation well in advance of when you need to be providing care is really critical. And if it's someone with a chronic illness or an ongoing journey where they're going to need some extended care, like Alzheimer's or dementia, for example, understanding that individual's wishes before you have to be in that crisis situation where you have to start making decisions for them is really, really helpful for family members. So a ton of resources for the caregiver at that AARP Caregiver Resource Center, but we also have a number of resources for employers as they're working to support their working family caregivers. There are training videos, there are policy recommendations, really just a whole host of information at aarp.org/employer caregiving as a way to find out how to better support your employees. So I think that's what I've got, and I will hand it back to our moderator.
Well, thank you, Kathy, for that excellent presentation and information. And it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker and welcome Dr. Heidi Orstad as our next presentation. An innovator at heart, Dr. Orstad serves as a clinical consultant for Marsh McLennan. She holds a DNP and a certificate in healthcare design from the University of Minnesota and has been in practice for over 30 years. For Marsh McLennan, Dr. Orstad works with employers to implement strategies to help employers control healthcare costs, improve health outcomes, and promote employee engagement. So thank you, Heidi, for being with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thanks, Amy. I hope everybody can hear me okay, and you'll let me know if they can't. So, and Kathy, thank you for sharing all that you did. I think the audience will probably hear some of the same statistics and such from me, but it's always good to hear things twice, I think. So, all right, we'll keep moving here. So there's three things we're going to talk about. 3 buckets is how I kind of put my information together in the time that we'll spend reviewing my slides. First we'll talk about what. So, what is the problem that we're talking about? In this case, it's really understanding the caregiving population in the workforce. The second part is so what? So what is important about that, in the lens as an employee, in the lens as an employer. And the third bucket is now what? So what do employers do with that information? What are strategies that they can consider? And so that's how we'll kind of spend the time together today. Before we do, I want to just introduce a recent experience that we had within our family as caregivers for my beloved and favorite brother-in-law, Anthony. So this is my brother, Chris, and his husband, Anthony. And we had quite a caregiving journey over the last few years. So here we are together. And I put this picture here on purpose because very sadly, Anthony was diagnosed with early onset dementia amidst my mother's hospice journey. So we were straddling really a couple of, big tragedies at the same time. I'm very, very fortunate to consider both of these men amongst my best friends. So when that tragedy hit, it was devastating. And my brother and Anthony were not alone. I lived 5 minutes from them. So, really, we became kind of a triad. And so, during the time of the diagnosis and after, we really did have a lot of decisions that we faced together. And my eyes were wide open to what is it like to be a younger working adult with a spouse with such a diagnosis and all of the decisions that came with it. I've been a nurse, as you heard, longer than 30 years. I'd helped my aging parents, and aging parents in their 80s are expected to get sick. But somebody in their 50s is not expected to come down with something like a dementia diagnosis. And so it was just an unexpected thing to have happen. And these two had been together 20 years, but sadly only married 3 because of the recent changes in marriage laws. So these are some of the things that we really did face together. First, the diagnosis. Then how do we work this out as a working spouse? So I can tell you, my employer, Marsh McLennan, Lisa's on the phone right now with us all. I'm so grateful because every step along the way, I had the support of my leader. Chris works for Delta, fantastic support, but I know in another situation, it would have been very difficult because he could not leave his home. He could not, there was no options for Anthony in adult daycare during COVID. He couldn't travel like he might need to for his work because he couldn't leave Anthony alone. So it was just really kind of an eye-opening experience during that COVID time. The other piece was loneliness. Chris and Anthony were a very social couple. Upon that diagnosis, it was difficult. Chris couldn't leave. Anthony didn't want to leave, so they were home alone quite a bit. Issues with extended family, LGBTQ bias in the healthcare workforce. Figuring out what to do with early aphasia because Anthony lost his ability to speak quickly after his diagnosis. So how do you communicate? How do you understand what he needs? And then it came with behaviors and then elder law. What do we do? How do we protect Chris's assets? How do we get power of attorney? How do we keep him from driving? Because Anthony was, fully sure he was able to drive. How do you pay for these things? How do you apply for Social Security disability income, and on and on and on. The list was endless, right down to the end of getting hospice involved, providing a memory care, and then upon the loss of Anthony, grieving. And how do we grieve? How do you speak of this? Who's going to know? So it was just quite an experience. And I bring this up today because I think if you're an employer and you know you have an employee whose spouse has a dementia diagnosis, or you know an employee whose spouse has hospice, you might not realize that all of these different situations are happening while your employee is at work or at home. All of these things are taxing on their mental health, their financial health, their well-being as a family member. And it's important for you to consider this and why they might not be fully there at work. So here again are some key caregiver trends to understand. Like we heard from Kathy, caregivers spend an additional 32 unpaid hours of work caregiving. So that's like a double job. The caregiver spends at least $7,000 out of pocket. In my brother's case, it far exceeded that. Many unpaid caregivers suffer from financial, workplace, and relationship stress. And the COVID-19 crisis heightened all of that. Because if you can remember correctly, senior services stopped. Home care essentially stopped because people didn't know, can I trust this person to come into my home? What have their COVID safety practices been? Adult daycare is closed. So all of that really closed. Families were reluctant to put their loved one into a nursing home, knowing that they couldn't go in and to visit them. So it was really an influx time period. And importantly, family caregivers are rarely asked, how does this affect you? What is difficult? How can we help you? These are questions that aren't asked. So it's a silent journey for many caregivers. And that's important to understand as an employer, especially when Kathy pointed out, half of the people who are caregivers haven't even told their leader that they're a caregiver. As Kathy said, the makeup of the caregiver population. So 1 in 5 Americans are caring for adult. I can tell you walking through an employer situation who has kids, because there are pictures of children everywhere. Far be it from us to know who's a caregiver. Many are employed, most are employed, and surprisingly 40% are male. I think we do know that the majority obviously are female, but don't forget that there are sons, brothers, fathers taking care of their family members. And 21% report that their health suffers due to caregiving. And if you think about caregiver mental well-being, we know what the triggers are for mental well-being challenges, but I want you to think about this as it relates to the pandemic. 66% of caregivers had mental health challenges during the pandemic. When we talk about the sandwich generation, so those who have a teenager and maybe an adult parent with cancer, 85% of that sandwich generation had adverse mental health symptoms. 40% of caregivers had passive suicidal thoughts, like, I wish I just wouldn't wake up. But 30% seriously considered taking their own life. So what are signs of caregiver stress and burnout? Not surprisingly, anxiety, depression, and irritability, difficulty sleeping, new or worsening health problems, trouble concentrating, feeling resentful, and as Kathy mentioned, substance use, neglecting self-care, and increased loneliness and isolation. And I'm going to even put that one on top because I think that triggers a lot of what follows. And I want you also to consider this. A lot of that mental health burden is also triggered back to ambiguous loss as part of the caregiving journey. So ambiguous loss is a loss that is unclear. It has no resolution and no predictable end or closure. So this loss might be a devastating diagnosis. It might be assuming care as a caregiver. It might mean moving out of your home and into your home of your parents. It could be a divorce. It could be something like that. And in the case of caregiving, it really is a loss. So many goodbyes. I think about Anthony, first Chris got the diagnosis along with Anthony. Then Anthony lost his ability to speak. He lost his ability to dress himself, his ability to bathe, his ability to toilet, his ability to prepare food, his ability to eat food. All of those goodbyes are cascading. And for the one with the disability, that diagnosis is devastating. For the caregiver, loss of the future as you know it, ability to travel, job security or advancement, companionship, financial security, all of those little losses add up and it creates a grief response. So I want you to consider that again as an employee, as a caregiver, as an employer, as a friend, because grief has somewhat of a predictable channel that we know about. Ambiguous loss is a game changer because it isn't a one event. It isn't a death that we know we can get over. It is lots of little losses along the way. So the reactions are, not surprisingly, unpredictable. So what? The impact of caregiving on employees. So caregiving in the workplace. So 52% of employees lost income because they had to miss work. 59% had to take 2 or more days off in a row from work because of a caregiving obligation. 73% had to leave work early. 70% had to call out of work one day. 68% did not take on any additional work responsibilities. And 68% felt that their timeliness of their work suffered. Now, remember, half of these caregivers never told their leader that they had a caregiving responsibility. So not knowing that, it's not too surprising that perhaps on their performance evaluation, things were, not as they could have been had the leader known that there were reasons for some of these findings. So what are the common concerns amongst working caregivers? Number one, emotional. Caregiving is stressful. Employees may be reluctant, like we said, to talk about caregiving. So they feel alone. They're carrying this big secret, this big burden, thinking they're the only ones, when they know like every 5th cubicle, somebody else has the same responsibility. Professional, they're worried that their manager might think they're less committed because the person next to them has no responsibilities, no children, no caregiving, and they're volunteering for everything and they're getting promoted. Financial, like we discussed, so many out-of-pocket expenses with caregiving, taking the loved one to the doctor, paying that copay, picking up depends, picking up medications, all of that adds up. All the gas adds up. Health, employees may not feel they have time to go to their own health appointments because they're so busy running mom and dad to theirs. And like Kathy said, this is a diversity and inclusion issue. You can see here, groups more likely to work full-time and provide care: women, 14% more likely. Those making less than $50,000 are 15% more likely. Hispanic Americans, 19% more likely. African Americans, 24% more likely. So, this is just something to consider when you're looking at your workforce. Consider that this is a diversity and inclusion issue and make your benefits considerations appropriately. The other thing to consider is that employees really are seeking parity amongst caregiving benefits. And like Kathy said, maternity and paternity benefits have really, and leave, have been on the forefront for years. So this is a benchmark report out of Mercer. So paid maternity leave beyond paid disability in 2021, 63% of large employers have this figured out. Paid paternity leave, 66% of employers have this figured out. Let's go down this channel down here. We are to elder care assistance. Elder care caregiver leave, 8% of employees, large employees, have this figured out. So there is definitely not parity between caregiver leave and paternity maternity leave. There's some parity here we can see between child care referral and consultations and elder care referrals and consultations. So that is really a green light. And in terms of backup child care services, 31%, backup elder care services, 24%. So I think we're gaining traction in a couple of employer solutions, but we do have, room to go in terms of providing, leave across kind of this benchmark report. So supporting caregiving is an opportunity for employers. Number one, employee engagement and productivity. I will never forget how Lisa showed up when Chris and Anthony were going through what they were, and her green light for me to do what I needed to do at the time that made sense for me, her trust in me as an employee. It really drove a lot of admiration for her as a leader and MMA as a company. Talent recruitment and retention. If I walk into a company and I know I'm a caregiver and I see that they have caregiving leave, that is a huge plus for me. Reduced healthcare costs, because if I have the time to take care of my dad and myself, or my brother-in-law and myself, I am going to cost the company less over time. Huge workforce loyalty. You don't forget people that take care of you when the chips are down. And it creates a culture of respect. If I know that my friend and colleague sitting next to me is helping her brother with his cancer diagnosis, and I see that our leader is supporting her in that, I admire my company and my leader. So now what? What are some employer strategies? I think what's really important as a leadership team is to really do a survey first of yourself. Look through your policies. Have a meeting about this. Is your workplace caregiver strategy or friendly? Do you use the term family caregiver in your benefits information, or is it pretty specific to maternity, paternity care? Do you consider family caregiving in the same way that you do young families? Are managers sensitive to the presence of caregivers in their business unit? Do you make it okay to talk about that? Are managers able to support employee caregivers with flexible work arrangements? And are we as an organization willing to commit to supporting caregivers? This recent survey out of the Business Group on Health asked this question: which relationship qualifies for caregiver leave? So I think Kathy was mentioning that, some groups cover parents, they might cover spouses, but they may or may not cover siblings, they may or may not cover friends. So this is the result. Over 80% cover spouses, spouses, children, and parents. You can see that. Unmarried partner. But as it goes down here, grandparents, grandchildren, siblings, we're dipping off. But interestingly, I think this is a good sign that 18% of companies will actually cover caregiving for people that are not a familial relation. I have a good friend who had cancer, and I was able to take her to chemo. I brought my laptop, but she needed somebody to take her, and I was able to do that. I didn't formally have to take a leave, but there are a lot of people that are single in this world that need somebody to help them. So I think that's something that for employers to consider. Another question: which work arrangements do you offer caregivers? So you can see here that 85% of employers offer flexible work arrangements, and you can see remote on a part-time, remote on a full-time, part-time scheduling, flexibility to work hours while remaining benefits, that's 42%. And then there's leave sharing and phased retirement. So these are good metrics for you guys to consider when you're figuring out what makes sense for us in our company. And then ask, which practices, resources, or vendors have you adopted? First of all, leave policies and flex time. Have you put together a caregiver leave? Do you have set forth the ability to use sick or personal days for caregiving? Flexible work schedules? Do you have FMLA guidelines? Do you have access to caregiving help? Things like expert medical opinion and referral services, digital caregiving tools, subsidized in-home backup care, or a list of low-cost, no-cost resources. Do you offer support for caregivers? Things like employee assistance programs, support groups, coaching on site or via the phone, or online support tools? Here are some of the different senior care or caregiving resources that we have worked with in the past. So wealthycare.com and Torchlight that offer some of those advocacy services. So for example, Wealthy, if you knew that you had an employee who was recently a caregiver, needed to figure out resources for their loved one, this is an advocacy services and navigation service. So some of our employers, I should say, have used these successfully. The other thing to consider as you're building up your strategy is what are the best leave programs that you have in place. So this is according to the Business Group on Health. You want to prepare your employees and team for coverage during absence. So this includes caregiver leave. Provide them with the resources, policies, and checklists. Have this ready to go so that you're not you're prepared for a response when the time comes. And then you want to have all of those structures in place so that they know who to hand off their work to, so that they're not being bothered during their leave. And do not share concerns over arranging coverage or budget impacts with the employee. They should not worry about that piece while they're also worrying about their caregiving responsibility. And consult with your HR team if in doubt about how to proceed. The other piece is important to facilitate a smooth transition back to work. Identify if any reasonable accommodations are needed. So sometimes what we're finding our employers are doing is transitioning people back part-time and then full-time after the first month. So easing people back to work. That's especially important if what's happened is maybe the loss of that loved one. So if people are in a state of bereavement. So being gentle upon return to work. And again, give as much flexibility as the role allows, and communicate plans for coverage with the employee prior to leave. And then assist employee with transition back to work, assuming employee can pick up where they left off. So if it's been a long time, make sure that transition again is as easy as possible. We're going to provide you with several different resources here. And Rebecca's going to send the decks. These are not a link, but these are, again, I'm going to borrow from Kathy here. Several of the AARP resources are those that we share quite a bit. And then here are some resources as well that I think are particularly helpful. The Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving is definitely very helpful. The NIH resource is very helpful. In Minnesota, I also recommend the Senior Linkage Line. And then one I don't have on here right now, but findhelp.org is a really useful free resource. They even have an app on your phone. You put in your zip code, you search for what type of service that you're needing, and up comes a resource within that area. So here are some more resources that I'm going to leave behind. You can explore when they make sense for you. And again, Rebecca will share these with you. I want to share a couple of exemplars before we move on to our panel discussion. I know we've been talking a little bit about some employee resource groups, so I wanted to share one that really has done a fantastic job, and that's out of Michigan State University. So an employee resource group really is a place for employees to come together and they share the same life situation. In this case, it's adult caregiving. So the goal of this group is to discuss related topics with the goal of connecting and sharing resources. And the way they've structured their group is to have expert speakers present on a monthly basis. And I just put some links here into some interesting speakers that they scheduled over the next year. So if you're looking to say, you know, this is something I think we have enough of a population that are caregivers, I think we need to do something like this. This really, the structure makes sense, and you could easily take this structure and consider it for your employees. Another exemplar I wanted to introduce is Cisco. So obviously a huge company, but I think it's easy again to look at what they've done and think, how can we take this structure and put it into place in our workforce? So what they have in place again is Wealthy, which is the one of the solutions that I talked about, which is a caregiving concierge. They also have CareLinks, which is a matchmaker if you wanted to help your employees to find an in-home caregiver. They have Rethink Care, which connects those with special needs to experts, kind of like a second medical opinion. And then Cisco Mindsets, which is a mindfulness program. They have expert medical services. So if somebody has a rare diagnosis and you want a second opinion, whether that is, you know, a cancer diagnosis or neurological diagnosis, that's available to the employees. And then they have legal services, which is important if you're doing estate planning or you need to get power of attorney paperwork in place. And this is also something Cisco has put into place for their caregivers. actually, it's across the company, but they have introduced flex time, critical time off, and leave of absence. And this is all well structured so that in the case you have a caregiving emergency, you can insert flex time. If you need critical time off for a sudden unexpected situation, they can enact that. If you need a leave of absence, they have policies and procedures in place, recognizing that during a journey of being a caregiver, one day is never going to be the same as another. So they really do have processes in place. What they don't want is for somebody to leave their role as an employee at Cisco, because they are going through this journey at this time in their life. So they really have structured this well for those employees. So with that, I will hand it over to the moderators.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Orsted. There's so much information that was in both of those presentations. I can't wait to go back and look. Some of those resources were new for me. And there's just so much out there. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat. We have a few minutes before we jump into our panel discussion. And the first one, and either Dr. Orsted or Kathy, you can take it. What would you suggest to employers who are able to support employees in areas with major service gaps, such as employees in rural areas?
Do you want to take it, Kathy, or I can?
I can start, and then happy to have you jump in as well. So, knowing that folks in rural areas, they might have to travel long distances to provide that care. There might be limited services in their area. And so I think for AARP, our support of paid family medical leave program, allowing those employees time to take off. It's not just an hour or two. They might need an entire day to get their loved one to doctor's appointments that might be a few hours away. So, paid family leave is probably the big one. And then again, those flexible work arrangements, whether, they can work from home or flex their time. Maybe they come in early, leave early, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Kathy said. The other thing I might add is there's a lot of new capabilities in telemedicine. So what you might just make sure that your team members know that virtual visits are a capability. Sometimes if they can work with a care coordinator for the specialist, they could schedule a virtual visit. They could have the labs drawn at a local facility and have a virtual visit with a provider. That my daughter works as a provider in a rural community in Northwest Minnesota, and most of the specialists are about an hour away. So she'll do that for her families that are elderly and shouldn't be driving in the snow. And she'll say, I'm going to set up a virtual visit with a cardiologist in Fargo. We're going to draw the labs here. You can talk to the doctor over your cell phone. So as much as we can use technology to enable those visits and reduce travel time, I think that's a really good solution. And then the other piece to always remember is some of the carriers actually offer travel benefits. So it's a forgotten benefit of your insurance. So if you have to see a specialist that's over 100 miles away or sometimes 75 miles away, mileage and flights are oftentimes covered. So that's another piece as a caregiver not to forget, because usually if they need a caregiver companion, you are reimbursed for that.
All right, there's a few more questions that have come in. So this is from an anonymous attendee, imagining that some employers will say this is what FMLA is for. Obviously, the solutions Heidi suggests extend beyond basic FMLA. How does one respond to employers that think FMLA covers all caregiver needs?
Heidi, I'm going to let you start with that one.
I think it's a really good question, and I think if you were to take out the language of the FMLA and work with, if you have an elder law attorney, have them put together language that is helpful to you to drive responses. I know we did that with when we met with Anthony's elder law attorney. We had her kind of tease apart what benefits would make sense. Now, when it came to Delta, we didn't need to use it, but it was available to us, because an example might be, if Anthony was having a tough morning, Chris maybe couldn't make it on the 9 o'clock call because he had to physically help him get ready. And you can't use FMLA for, those unexpected tough mornings, right? That's an example. So she helped us kind of dissect which were FMLA applicable and which weren't. And then he had that in his back pocket because I know some companies are more legalistic than others. So I think walking through that with a legal expert, don't forget that your EAPs have legal hours. That is an untapped resource. So use those lawyers on the EAP and kind of present that to them. Ask the question. And the other piece is if your caregiving situation is one of cancer. So if you live in Minnesota and your family member has cancer, there's free cancer legal associates that will provide, just no matter income, they will provide you cancer legal aid for free. So I will send that to Rebecca to share with this group as well. So that's another resource to walk through those kind of tricky questions.
Well said. I don't have anything else to add.
Great. Thanks. And I think we have one more question that we can do, and we will then be able to transition into our full panel discussion. This one comes from Seth Courier. Are there examples of potential policies available that employers can look at and modify for our organization?
So I can start, and we may be able to talk about this more in the panel conversation as well. But there was recently just the RAISE Act that created a national strategy on caregiving to support family caregivers. And so this is really a list of like nearly 350 actions that can support family caregivers. So anything from, providing respite care services, paid family leave, credit for caring type of situations where you can get reimbursed for some of that care that you provide. So it's great that there is this kind of national strategy now, and now it's rolling that out to the various state and different agencies to implement some of those policies. But it's a great start to look at some of that, to look at that national strategy and where those areas of support might be.
Yeah, I would agree with Kathy. Absolutely. If we can put the information about that act, I think in the follow-up, that would be a helpful resource for the group too.
Awesome. Well, thanks to you both. Great questions coming forth, and keep other ones in mind for our next section for question and answer. But before we jump into our panel, we are actually going to watch a really short, about a 2-minute video that is from AARP. So I'm going to hand it over to Mimi to start that. And Mimi, I'm not hearing sound on this. I think if you stop sharing screen and then you go back to reshare, and then you can hit share with sound.
First faced with this issue, where to get the answers, where to find someone to come in the house, where to find facilities, how to find financing is really a big daunting task. More and more employers are going to be stepping in to fill some of these gaps. We've had backup child care for a number of years. We extend that out to family members for elder care. We're providing access to senior care advisors to all our employees. So we'll be able to bring the ability for someone to talk to, get the information, find the answers, find some referrals for at-home providers for facilities, as well as even a nice little account where you can track all that information so you can know who remembers anything. Has really been valuable. We've added a specific kind of curriculum on caring for loved ones and being able to really help employees understand the financial burdens that come through and how they can address them. This is a clear emerging challenge that we're going to face as an employer. Meeting these type of needs is going to be very, very important for us going forward.
All right. Thank you, Mimi, so much. And now I think we're going to transition into our panel presentation. And Amy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Georgia. And yeah, wow, what great information. And I think I have the first question here for our panelists, and this is for Jessica, Pam, and Bill. You know, we've heard from Kathy and Dr. Orsted, so we'll start our panel discussion with introductions from Jessica Miller, Pam, and Bill. Would you please introduce yourselves and share what brings you to this event? And we'll start with Jessica.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica Miller. I'm the Interim Director of Workforce Strategy with the Department of Employment and Economic Development. I'm excited to be here today to talk about some strategies that employers can use to be more inclusive to our caregiving workforce.
Well, thank you. We're lucky to have you with us. Pam, can you go next?
Absolutely. I'm Pam Lonnie. I am a working caregiver. I have been doing this since, well, I think 2017. My mom was diagnosed with lung cancer. And so I was a secondary caregiver for her, along with my dad. And shortly after that, my dad started showing some signs, and we had him diagnosed. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease toward the end of that same year. And in 2018, my mom passed away. And so now over the last 4 years, I've been doing most of the caregiving for him. And with the help of a caregiver consultant and wonderful support groups, that's what led me to this.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Bill, could you share next?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Bill Tiedemann. Currently principal for my Tiedemann Consulting Group, but I'm a former executive director of a home and community-based services organization called Hope House. And I was the executive director creating benefits and serving. We were a caregiving organization. And we certainly had employees who were also caregiving at the same time. So it was a complex situation. So I come to you from an employer's perspective.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Welcome to each of you. And I'm going to go ahead, Georgia, and just start with the first question that is for Jessica. We know that caregiving impacts segments of the labor force differently: women, single parents, BIPOC, LGBTQ plus, for example. What are some of the considerations that employers have to be mindful of when developing their recruitment and retention strategies in today's workforce? Can you provide some examples for us?
Yes, absolutely. I like this question a lot because I think that we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge inequities across positions and sectors that allow for more flexibility in regards to workforce who have caregiving needs, as well as our workforce that has historically been more barriered. Employers, we should all be aware of the need for connection and purpose for today's workforce. They want to sit at the table. They want to be able to provide their expertise, and they want to have the flexibility for life and intentionality around how we can ease the burden of caregiving for these for this talent and the home needs for our talent. I acknowledge that I have the privilege of being able to take 15 minutes a day to pick my kids up from school to combat the shortage of after school care. Many people do not. And that's a privilege that I have through my place of employment. Kathy's sentiment earlier about the skill set of caregivers being of great value to the organizations that they're working for is so, so true. This talent has problem-solving skills, time management skills, and I think that we can all appreciate the value of empathy and kindness on our teams. The vast amount of knowledge that is required to be a caregiver, often in a short amount of time, is astounding. My father had 2 strokes 2 summers ago, and I learned more about contradicting medications, blood pressure, and physical therapy in overnight than I ever thought was possible. And I think about our immigrant and refugee population that might have a language barrier navigating that same scenario. And it absolutely is mind-blowing. It's in our best interest as employers to retain this workforce and create an environment where they can thrive. And when I think about employers who are doing great things in this place, in this space, I think about those who are actively becoming engaged in supporting solutions to those barriers that impact their workforce with caregiving responsibilities outside of their work. Some examples, obviously flexibility around scheduling. There are employers that are utilizing a choose your own hours type of model where it might be on a 2-week rotation, school day hours for those that might have childcare needs, late starts and early starts for schools in particular. Just knowing that those scheduling conflicts are out there and predetermining solutions to them ahead of time, so employees don't always have to be the one to ask in that case is helpful. There was also an initiative that came out of the Northeast region called Babies at Work, where employers were allowing mothers or parents to bring in their non-mobile children for a period of time to work, and they were making amazing things happen. I'm also thinking a lot about financial support for childcare facilities. There's a childcare facility that is currently working on a partnership with another local transportation business that will go pick up talent and their children and drop them off at the childcare facility and then take them to work. We should be thinking about all the different barriers that come into play there. And you can take out childcare and put in elder care, for pretty much any of these particular solutions. I'm loving seeing the elder care and childcare combination facilities that are popping up. I'm also thinking about long-term care facilities that have dietary right in house, and they're creating meals that people can take home for their families. They're offering laundry services. How can we be easing the burden for our workforce that is working on taking care of their loved ones? And then if I can pull on the silver lining, and then I'll be quiet. I would say that COVID has taught us all so much. Employers learned how to pivot and keep business going by doing things they never thought were possible. That innovation happened. And I often challenge employers to continue on in that spirit and challenge themselves to not revert back to how things used to be done.
Great.
Thanks so much. Curious if anybody else on the panel has anything to add to that or wants to respond to.
I guess I would just have to say that I agree on the COVID thing. I've worked for Carleton County Human Services for over 20 years now and always been part-time. Never ever thought I would work from home. And due to the pandemic, I was pretty much forced or had to work from home for a while, but now was able to, come back partly in the office, partly at home. And that has made a world of difference in my caregiving duties as well. So.
Great. Thanks, Pam. Anyone else want to speak to that?
No, I could just piggyback on also the COVID situation. We did learn quite a bit through all the innovation we had to put into place. And I hope that we can continue to drive change around alternative ways to show up at work, such as remote. And so right now I'm also ironically caring for my father who is in Florida. And yesterday I had to get on a 3-way call with his doctor and make sure that he had proper wound care because he was a bit confused. So being able to have that ability to do that remotely and still meet my obligations around my consulting business that was really, really important.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. Well, I have another question here. This one is for Dr. Orsted. And just a reminder to all the participants right now, you can continue to enter questions into the Q&A section, and we will field those along with the ones that we have already. So Dr. Orsted, we know that there are a variety of caregiving situations across the age spectrum and for a multitude of reasons. Caring for an older adult is one experience. How do employees find the balance between supporting caregivers and offering flexibility and time they need to provide care for their care recipient, but also allow for families to employees who do not have care responsibilities? So really, you know, kind of how do employers juggle that? Because not everyone is caregiving. And I've certainly been in situations where there's questions around, well, why does that person get time off or have a more flexible schedule? You know, I need to care for my, you know, my life too, just because I don't have somebody that I'm caregiving for. So that's a sticky and often tough question. And I'm just curious about what your response would be.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, you know, working with employers, my client list, you know, has varied between about 30 and 50. And, you know, one thing I usually lead my client meetings with, and it's oftentimes with HR leaders, is the fact that HR leaders are posed with trying to figure out how do you work with a very diverse workforce, right? So you have some of your employees are fresh out of college, some are, you know, wanting to be new parents and wanting services for fertility and maternity leave. Some are that sandwich generation, caring for their teens and their parents. Some are looking towards retirement. Some, you know, are LGBTQ and QI and they want, you know, services for their health, maybe transgender services. There's all sorts of services and benefits that people want because everybody's different, expectedly so, and they look to their employers to meet their needs. And I think, and no time like the present, I think especially now, you know, especially in 2020, 2021, I think HR team members are called to be very flexible and very insightful for everybody's needs. And I think it's strategic to do so, because if you want to hold on to your employees in a kind of a volatile workforce, you best be prepared to meet those needs. So the best advice I might give is to always kind of wear your compliance hat while you're putting together benefit structures, and to be very transparent at times of like open enrollment, to say, you know, these are benefits that we offer for maternity, for caregiving, for our, you know, populations that have needs for mental health. Put it all on the table. And so that if somebody is resentful, because there will always, it's an 80-20 rule, right? You'll have 20% that will be a little angry that somebody got to take some caregiving leave. But if you're transparent about your benefit structure, far be it from somebody to say, I didn't know other people have these benefits and I don't. But the 80% will notice, gosh, it's great that you're taking care of Joe and so that he can take care of his dad. That's how I want my employer to take care of us. So, but again, with the compliance piece, it is really important to put that legal hat on, because you want to offer parity. You want to think through all of the different possibilities, and you want to have structures and processes in place that protect the employee and the employer, so that when that leave or that benefit is put into place, there's pretty safe guardrails for both sets of participants. So.
Yeah, Kathy.
Yeah, and I would jump in and just pointing back to that very first slide I shared, that there are really 4 types of people. They are either current caregivers, they will be caregivers, they have been caregivers, or they might need care someday. And so helping your employees understand that while they may not need that benefit right at this moment, that they may somewhere down the line be expecting a child, or have a parent that becomes sick, or a partner who becomes sick that they need to take care of, or I believe it was Heidi that shared, you know, a friend who had cancer that they just needed to take care of. Understanding that those benefits, while that employee may not be taking advantage of that particular benefit at this moment, those benefits are there for them to use when they need them.
Great. Thanks.
All right, I think I have a question here for Kathy regarding the priorities that AARP is working on to support working caregivers. Can you talk a little bit about what your policy priorities are to support working caregivers, and subsequently, how can employers assess their current benefits to determine if they are the right package for their caregiving employees?
Yeah, so I may punt the second half of that question to Heidi. I think she may be better versed to speak about that, or possibly Bill. But I can certainly talk about the policies. And so, AARP has a long history of supporting caregivers. We do have 45 states that have enacted the CARE Act that really includes family caregivers in any sort of discharge plan from the hospital to make sure that those folks who are caregivers are prepared to take care of their loved ones. I talked a little bit before about the RAISE Act, this national strategy to support family caregivers, and that it comes with a number of potential policy solutions, right? So, for example, at the federal level, Credit for Caring Act. This is a bipartisan effort that AARP has supported that would create some tax credits for those eligible caregivers who spend that $7,200 out of their own pockets to help provide that care for their loved ones. And so, we look forward to working with Congress and the administration to support family caregivers in those areas. And then I think at the state level, we have some real opportunities around paid family sick leave, so that paid family caregivers don't have to choose between caring for their loved one or their own financial security, or even losing their job. Again, some state tax credits that provide that financial support for folks who are providing care, or some reimbursement programs. More access to affordable, high quality help at home by expanding home and community-based services. And then again, stronger legal protections through either updated guardianship or power of attorney laws. And we do know that in the 2023 legislative session here in Minnesota, we will be working on a number of those issues. AARP does support a paid family leave program that would provide up to 12 weeks of partial wage replacement, or 90% of wage replacement for low-income individuals. Again, those investments in home and community-based services, so that family caregivers have those resources to go to. The other piece of it, it's a sort of a complex program called presumptive eligibility. So we know that when individuals maybe are hospitalized and maybe very low income, sometimes it can take up to 90 days to get qualified for state assistance or Medicaid. And finding a quicker pathway to get those folks, because a lot of times those folks might be funneled into a nursing home because that's the path of least resistance, or that's where they need to go while they're waiting on Medicaid eligibility. And presumptive eligibility would be a simplified way to get folks access to those home and community-based services through Medicaid, where they could receive the care at home. We know that a majority of people want to stay in their homes and communities as they age. And so providing access to those services is really important.
Thank you. Heidi, did you want to add to that? Oops, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. No, that was fantastic. The only thing I might add to that is I think just one place that my brother and I found really tricky was applying for Social Security disability income for Anthony, because he was under 65. And we found help with that resource, but knowing what the compassionate allowances are for that benefit. And, Anthony had one of his, being early onset dementia, having that diagnosis allowed for him to have a, kind of a expedited process, but otherwise it would have taken, I think, months to even get to the line. So he did get kind of fast tracked through that system, but that's another piece of the puzzle that I think caregivers would struggle to figure out. So if we could try to increase the list of compassionate allowances, that would be to everybody's benefit.
Thank you. Following up with that same question for Pam, in addition to a flexible work schedule, what are the key ways that your employer has demonstrated support so that you are able to remain fully engaged as an employee while still providing the care that your father needs? Are there additional benefits that your employer could provide that you feel would be beneficial?
Well, I initially said earlier about having, working a few days from home, and I have to explain that my dad lives right next door to me. So that's where I say it's a little bit easier when I'm working from home. I can take my lunch, I can run over there or whatever, but so that has been extremely helpful. I think that they've been so good about, I'm just kind of looking at my notes. I've been able to take time when needed for appointments, no questions asked, even when it's a last minute thing that comes up. One thing that I think is just so important is just understanding and not questioning. I'm one of those people that kind of thinks, oh, are they thinking that I'm trying to get away with something or whatever? But people are just helpful and empathetic and understand what you're going through. And, they're just really no questions asked and have been very, very good about approaching them about it. But, and then my HR department, when I first found out about my dad, I reached out about FMLA because I didn't understand, I didn't know anything about it or how we access it or anything. And they were very helpful and in educating me and telling me what I might need. And I've never had to access that, but I've known it was there. And so that was always really good. I think that has all been really helpful because I wrote myself a note. I think it was in Heidi's presentation. I hit every single bullet point on the stress and burnout list, every one of them. So it's really helpful to have that help with your employer and know that you're not going to be having to jump through too many hoops to get what you need.
Pam, that was the perfect segue to the next question that popped up in the Q&A. And it's such a good one. I was holding this question too. What have you done or what do you currently practice for self-care to ensure that you as a caregiver can maintain your health, your physical health, mental health, emotional health? What do you do personally? And then are there groups or entities that have supported you in your caregiving journey?
I have, a lot of this came through my caregiver consultant that, Chris Dwyer, she was so helpful and, she'd give me resources. I was able to start getting massages. That's been extremely helpful. I'm a mom, so I always had this mom guilt that, you can't come first, your child comes first or whatever. So it was hard to get over that feeling of I shouldn't be doing for myself right now. But so I've done massages. These support groups, Mimi is one of them that has headed support groups that I've wanted to get to. There's always something that I can come away with, whether it's something somebody said. I always thought, oh, what I have to say isn't going to mean anything, but I do really think that I've learned that even one little thing I might say might help somebody else. It makes you feel not alone, and that's has a very calming effect on me. And I'm trying to think, just even, I'm a naturally an anxious person anyway, but just knowing that I don't have the runaround at work and I don't have to worry, the next time I go to work, is there going to be a problem? I just feel so much better when I know that there's empathy there and that people are really understanding. And so I really, that goes a long way with me.
Great, thanks. And then this, another follow-up question for you, Pam, that just popped in is just there, somebody's wanting clarity on what a caregiver consultant is and how you
Well,
access them.
I guess for me, trying to remember how I initially accessed her. Chris works, I believe, through St. Louis County and Carleton County volunteer services of Carleton County. I'm not really sure how I stumbled across her, and I think it was when I initially was with my mom. It was with my mom, and she was in hospice, and then I kind of she kept on with me, but very, very, very supportive. I mean, very. She will meet with you in person. She can virtually. She's usually with me. It's been calling me once a month. How are things going? Giving the references and just direction and it's a support for me, to say that I think that you're on the right track with things. And it's just, I guess maybe even Mimi would be able to help understand how to access somebody like that.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that too. I'll actually put it in the chat here. Caregiver consultants are actually funded under Title III Older Americans Act dollars. And so you can access them if you are in Minnesota through the senior linkage line or the minnesotahelp.info. But I think it was Heidi that mentioned like Find Help or some of those other things to just really reach out to your local home and community-based service organization to say, hey, what types of support is available? But yeah, caregiver consultants, I think once people find them, they're like, how did I not know about you before? You're like my best friend and right-hand person to kind of walk with me on this journey because it's crazy. The person you mentioned does work for Volunteer Services of Carleton County, but they're all throughout the state of Minnesota, and I would venture to say in other states as well. So yeah, I think it's a great resource for folks.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. This next question is directed to you, Jessica. If you could share with us, how can employers help to shape a culture in their workplace of support for caregivers? A culture where employees support each other and the caregiver doesn't be resented by others.
Yeah, that can be challenging, right? And I think that we've had some of our experts here today spoken a little bit to that resentment idea, and that I think, Kathy, you said in particular, there are 4 types: somebody who's currently a caregiver, a future caregiver. At some point in our lives, we will be in a situation where we will need to be taking care of someone else. And so that culture work is super important, but culture work typically starts with ensuring an open and honest communication with workforce. If you want to know what your workforce wants, you have to ask them, and you have to create a space where your workforce feels comfortable and trust that you'll honor the information that they share. Employee groups made up of talent from all different levels, including all of those personal leaders, I think are super important too, not just your positional leaders, your personal leaders, those folks that are out there doing the work without the title. Having structured time for them to focus on this particular topic or whatever topic that you want them to focus on, I think is also huge. Any culture work also, it's imperative that it comes from the top down. For me personally, my leader will often share her balance of being a parent and all the responsibilities that come through during the work week. She'll mention taking her child to a doctor's appointment. So that teaches me something about what I'm able to do with my family needs as well. And then that also teaches me as a leader of the freedom that I have to be able to extend that on to the folks that I get to work with. So that is super important to have that modeled throughout the workday for any organization. And I think that that's something that employers need to be really aware of. When the culture supports these values, people appreciate it. We've talked a lot. There's been comments already about the loyalty. Today's workforce, we're seeing values. I mean, wages are important, but these are the type of things that keep people staying with an organization. These intrinsic things that tap into their value. When you're looking at the workforce right now that's currently employed and they're looking for other opportunities, they're looking for opportunities with employers that speak and meet those value needs. And it's these type of things that will attract them to your workplace. Oh, I think you're muted.
Great. Pam, did you want to add a follow-up to that at all in terms of how you're supported from your coworkers in your caregiving role, and anything specific you found to be supportive?
I guess I really kind of chose not to share too much. You know, I do think it is good to, you know, even for somebody that's really private about their personal lives, to, you know, share with your supervisor or, you know, immediate supervisor or whatever, because, you know, they would tend to be more understanding and helpful. Those that you know, people that I sit close to or whatever, I've shared with, and they seem to be very understanding. I've never had any issues of, you know, anything resentful or anything. But I would actually say that, you know, when, like I've said about my employer, I find that, I think it was the term workforce loyalty. I find that that empathy and that understanding has really strongly, it really promotes a desire by me to be a better, more productive employee. Like you say, you really want to do well for somebody that seems to really want to do well by you. So.
Great. Thank you, Pam.
I just want to piggyback, I think, on what Jessica and Pam said. There's a book by Mary Coloritis. It's called See Me as a Person. And it, you know, I think it was written for people in the healthcare industry, but it's applicable to any leadership position. And the premise is really that people, in essence, want to be seen as a person. And the first step to that is attuning to somebody, really getting to know them. What makes you tick? What's important to you? How can I support you? And it's kind of like a mother and a child relationship, right? Just kind of reading back and forth those cues. And when you have a leader that sees you as a person and has a work culture that supports that and supports you, it's gold, you know. And I think what we're hearing from Pam is that she feels safe and secure in her work. So that is one distraction that doesn't get in the way of caregiving. And so that's one gift as an employer that you can give to your employees that allows for them to have kind of a messy caregiving life outside of work. If work is one thing they don't have to worry about, it really is a huge gift. So I would say whatever you can do to see your employees as people, do that.
I just also want to add and piggyback on what Heidi just said, is that all of us have gone through a shared experience, and that's COVID. And we certainly have found empathy where, you know, from an employer's perspective, that must be brought forward. And I'm discussing that from a servant leadership perspective, but I didn't want to go too far in sort of the clinical leadership tools that we all use, but it's about understanding that we're all in this together. At any given point, I might be a caregiver, and if your leader has that ability to have the empathy, you have a your team will gather around and also have that empathy. We lost a lot of employees because of COVID. It was devastating in the home and community-based services sector. It still is. And how do we bring more employees into the sector is really critical. And everything that we've discussed will bring people closer together and create a dynamic team to continue to do our work.
Great. Thanks, Bill. And I'm glad you chimed in because the next question that I have is actually directed for you.
Oh.
Yeah. So if you can speak a little bit around the importance of open communication. I think we've been talking about culture and how do we foster that culture. But can you speak on the importance of open communication between the employee and employer as a tool to promote and sustain caregiver balance and reduce the stigma associated with being a caregiver employee?
Super. Okay. Well, I'll take it again from the experience we had as an organization during COVID. And all of us had a shared experience. I remember the day, and it was the day after Thanksgiving, and we were all warned not to come together for Thanksgiving. And I think that was in late 2020. And the organization that I was working for at that time, we had four residents who had not seen their family in some time. So we decided it was safe for us all to come together. And that included employees too who were working during that day. And wouldn't you know, we had a COVID outbreak the next day. It was like, oh, we should have never done that. But I think what we also learned is that the importance of understanding each other. I come to my work with my heart on my sleeve. I want folks to also come to work with their hearts on their sleeves, because we work in an environment that is at that time, we were caregiving for people living with HIV who can no longer live independently. So they came to us with a variety. It wasn't just the HIV that was the issue, but it was all the other dynamics that come with the diagnosis or come with a terminal disease. So I feel that the environment was already open to have those connections and being able to share about our personal lives. Not every organization has that opportunity. So again, I think it was Jessica that mentioned that if your employer gives you permission to be open and honest with your feelings, then you have a different culture. And it's all about what culture do you want to create? And how do you want that culture to drive your business? It's not always about the bottom line. We do have matrix. All of us have matrix that we need to meet, but can you do that from a person-centered or human-centered perspective? That's really, really important. I hope I answered
Awesome.
your question.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I mean, I'm sitting here reflecting about how when we start from a place of commonality and all having that shared experience, and it really is about empathy and seeing the other. And the follow-up question is actually to any panelist who wants to answer. When is there an ideal time for employees to start having this conversation with their employers? Is it in the midst of a crisis? Is it before it ever happens? How do we help people start having these conversations as they're able?
I'm happy to jump in and start. As I talked about in my presentation, with our Prepare to Care resources, it's always better to have those conversations before it reaches a crisis situation. And I spoke a little bit about my caregiving experience. My dad, about 5 years ago, was diagnosed with early stage Alzheimer's, and I shared that with my supervisor right away because I didn't know what that was going to look like. And I didn't know how quickly things would progress, just so that she was aware at that time that, at that moment, it was really stressful for me. And I didn't know what to expect or experience, and also sort of set the stage that, this might be a long haul, and down the road, I might need some additional flexibility going forward. And I have a different supervisor now, but found out my dad had to have shoulder surgery. It was really important for me to be there to support my mom, and having that conversation as soon as I knew something was going to happen, so that when I needed to take that time off, they were aware of the situation, and it didn't come out of the blue and as a surprise. So I think it's always better to have that conversation early rather than later.
I can weigh in here too. I think, fortunately or unfortunately, every workplace has a different level of psychological safety, and every leader has a different approachability factor. So I think in an ideal world, early is better. Sometimes the relationship is such that it might be tricky. So I think, maybe figuring out who's the safe person in your leadership structure to introduce that structure or that conversation. If you feel like your direct report maybe isn't the right one, how do you garner that conversation? Is it the person in HR you want to talk to? Is it your direct support? Feel that out for yourself, depending on the level of psychological safety in your workspace. I wish everybody had the relationship I did with my leader, but I know that isn't always the case.
That's a great point, Heidi. And to Bill's point too about, being a leader that kind of wears your heart on your sleeve when you come to work every day. I have a staff of 7, and I've been very open with my situation. And so I feel like being a leader that can share the challenges that I'm encountering gives them the space to feel safe to share those, whatever challenges they might have with me as well. And knowing that I've appreciated the flexibility that my organization has provided me, knowing that I'm going to extend that same courtesy to them, whether it's with their kids, whether it's with caring for their own parents, caring for themselves, whatever that situation might be. So, putting myself out there a little bit to make sure that my staff feels that they have that safe space to do the same.
Great. Thank
And
you.
I'd like to just follow up on what Kathy just said, is that, frankly, we are caregivers all our lives. We are. We may have children. We may have, right at the moment, I'm a caregiver to my partner who just had shoulder surgery. I have to be home to put on his socks every morning. So how do I do that? So, I mean, it is an absolutely, I think we all need to be aware that at any given point, we could be put into that role, or someone would need to take care of us. So I'm really appreciative of this whole being a part of this day, but also very appreciative of what COVID brought to my life specifically about having a broader empathetic response to being human, just being human. And it's not just about the bottom line. We are employing other humans, and how do we want to be treated? It's the platinum rule, not the golden rule, but the platinum rule.
Okay, we do have one more question for our panelists, and I'm hoping we have some time for this one here that's directed to Kathy, Dr. Orsted, or to Jessica. We know that employers should gather information about the needs of their employees in order to be more responsive to caregiving employees and mitigate the hidden costs of turnover and productivity loss. In your experience working with employers, is it a common practice for employers to use tools like a care census to understand the company's care demographics and evolving needs? And where can employers access these types of tools? So Kathy, Dr. Orsted, or Jessica, if one of you want to take that question.
I can start. I'm sure others have opinions. I know Harvard Business School came out in 2020, highly recommending that groups or teams, I should say, start introducing a care census, because when the pandemic started, I don't think any employer knew how much they saw caregiving within their workforce until options were closed down and employees had to react and figure something out. So having an awareness of the caregivers in your workforce is just a really strong idea. I will certainly be happy to share those resources with Rebecca. And I think the rest of the question is it a common practice? It's not common enough. I think everybody here has probably seen an employee survey and they asked, do you like working here? Do you like your leader? But rarely do they ask, are you a caregiver? So I think while it's been introduced, I don't think there's been a huge adherence. So anybody on this call, I think, can maybe go the next step and introduce it. Where I think there's been growth in the employee surveys are in a couple of spaces. They've introduced some questions around psychological safety, which I think is definitely a step in the right direction and applicable to caregiving. And there's also been growth in surveying people's financial security, and even questions related to social determinants of health and related scarcity, things like food security, housing security, and again, like I said, financial security. So I guess that's what I would add, but I do think it's an area where there's a lot of opportunity to spread the word.
Great, thanks, Heidi. And I think I have one final question. I'm going to have Jessica respond to it first, but others can chime in. Can you speak to the work that needs to be done, or how this looks differently, like in manufacturing and healthcare sectors, where people are on shift works and those employers must be in person? And so how do employers, I guess, what advice do you have for those employers? How might caregiver support or policies look different in those types of industries? Bearing in mind also there might be, more, if those are more entry-level positions or things like that, people might have other, disparities that in life that they're working with.
I think right now is a good time to be having these conversations, because employers are more motivated than ever to be accommodating to the needs of today's workforce, because they need people. And so all of a sudden the tides have turned and the things are it's an employer or employee driven market. So we're seeing employers are doing things differently now in that regard. But we've got manufacturing companies that are already doing some things. They're looking at that open scheduling model I talked about earlier, the choose your own hours, which some manufacturers are like, that would never work for me, but they're making it happen. Red Wing Shoes is one of them in Southeast Minnesota. They're making it happen. So from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., you can go in and choose blocks of time. It could be 2-hour increments throughout this block of time from 10 to 10, I believe it is. So there are ways to make those adjustments happen. I'm also seeing a lot of this like flex or this on-call type of work. So people still want to be able to work and contribute, but they don't know every day what's going to happen. That seems to be happening more in the healthcare realm. But again, if you're in a situation where benefits are being impacted, then that's a challenge too. But employers I'm seeing are more willing to be having those conversations because they want to retain who they can, or draw people back into the workplace who might have self-selected out because they thought that they couldn't find an employer to meet their needs based on their caregiving responsibilities. One other way to kind of look at this, and I'll wrap it up because I know I want to give everybody else a chance to pipe in, is how are you representing these jobs when you are posting them? Are you creating a job posting that showcases your ability to be flexible, or are you having a standard approach to your job postings or even marketing materials that would have somebody self-select out because they're like, that's not going to work for me based on based on just how you're promoting your work, your jobs.
I had approached our human resources when I was planning on doing this panel. And I got a response from our manager of human resources. And this is what he told me. He said, the most important thing is to consider flexibility. The ability for employers to be flexible varies based on the industry and also the individual's role. Employers should avoid a blanket policy and instead consider each individual situation. For example, we have no flexibility with a corrections officer, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be flexible with an administrative worker. So that was his statement. And I don't know any background as far as what they've been able to, offer to people that need this flexibility for caregiving.
Well, thank you for all of that. What a rich discussion, and we are coming up to the end of our time here together, and I just want to thank all of our panelists and everyone for the great insight. I have learned a ton. I was so busy taking notes, Georgia. I hope I didn't lose track of the synchrony in which we were working together as moderators. But I just want to, share some closing remarks regarding as we think about, our call to action and what within our own, personal and professional networks, how can we influence employers to consider and improve support for working caregivers? How do we, drive people to that place of understanding? Because each one of us has a sphere of influence that we can impact, and how do we challenge ourselves and our colleagues to start there, to lean into that network that we have impact on. I really loved how we coached this conversation around and in diversity and inclusion. That may not have been our intention, but I really heard it throughout the panelists, the stories people shared, the way in which bias, whether unconscious or not, can show up in this experience. How do we lean into that and help our colleagues, our friends, our support network to really understand diversity and inclusion in all its forms? How do we lean into that notion of cultural fluency and humility that we need to bring into the spheres of our influence, and really help and engage people to understand that diversity comes in many forms, and that as people who share marginalized identities in whatever form, we need all of you to step up and really help move the needle, so that people can really live and age with dignity, and that people are supported in all ways. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Georgia for some final housekeeping, and again want to thank everyone for this very rich and meaningful dialogue.
Wonderful. Thanks, Amy. And no, you weren't the only one taking notes and thinking on personal and professional levels while trying to juggle the moderating, because it was such rich information. So thank you for everyone. And for all of you who stuck with us. I know this is a timely and important topic. So speaker bios and our slide presentations will be provided in a follow-up email, so keep your eye on that. Just note that this is also recorded, so we encourage folks to share this broadly. It's just such an important topic, given so many reasons. So please do share this, talk to people about it. We'll have the links to the resources. They have been put in the chat, but they'll also be included in the follow-up email. And then we really love it when folks fill out the survey. So keep an eye out for that. That helps us know what we're doing well, what you'd like to see more of. So thanks again for everyone coming. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mimi to close us out in our last minute here.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, what a great event. You see the survey link on the final slide here. There's also the QR code if you want to use your phone right now to grab it. We hope you found our event useful. I just really thank you so much for attending. Thank you to our excellent panelists. I think it was just an incredible, robust discussion with a lot of useful information. Thank you, interpreters. Thank you to the team behind the series. And to all of you attendees, please keep an eye out for our 2023 Northland Diversity in Aging series events, which we will be posting and will be included in emails to anyone who's registered. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.